Nvidia's new RTX 5070 Ti laptop GPU is very similar to the RTX 4080 from last gen. I've compared both laptop GPUs in 25 games at 3 resolutions to show you all the differences. Both of these GPUs have 12 gigs of VRAM with a 192-bit memory bus, but the 5070 Ti uses faster GDDR7 memory with more memory bandwidth. The older 4080 actually has 26% more CUDA, Tensor, and RT cores compared to the newer 5070 Ti, and the 4080 has a higher maximum GPU power limit too, so it sounds like the 4080 should perform way better, but it's not that simple. More power equals more performance. This graph shows the 3DMark TimeSpy graphics score from each GPU at different power levels, and the 4080 in purple wasn't really that much higher than the 5070 Ti in red. The lines are quite close together, which means they perform similarly with the same amount of power. With both running at 65 watts, the 4080 was only scoring 7% higher than the 5070 Ti, but with both running at 140 watts, the maximum the 5070 Ti supports, the 4080 was less than 2% ahead. Luckily for the 4080, it's able to run up to 175 watts, at which point it's 8% ahead of the maxed out 5070 Ti at 140 watts. Gaming laptops with these specs are not cheap, so if we find any good sales on either of these GPUs, we'll add them to our gaminglaptop.deals website. Check it out with that link below to save money. Now, I'm using Lenovo's Legion Pro 7i for the RTX 4080 and XMG's Neo 16 for the RTX 5070 Ti, and both laptops run their GPUs at the full power limit. Unfortunately, the older 4080 laptop also has an older processor and slower RAM, but that's just going to be a real-world difference, as those newer processors are usually only available with the latest GPUs. It is what it is. The 5070 Ti laptop in red used a fair bit less power compared to the 4080 in purple. In 3 maxed out games at 4K, the older 4080 used anywhere between 26 to 37% more power, and it was actually maxing out its 300 watt charger. This means the 5070 Ti already wins from a performance per watt perspective, which is how many frames in a game it can produce per watt of power consumed. The 4080 may indeed hit higher FPS, as you'll see shortly, but it needs way more power to do so, meaning the 5070 Ti is more efficient. It's not really fair to compare temperatures here, as both laptops have different cooling designs, but the 5070 Ti was cooler in all games tested. Not too surprising, given the 5070 Ti has a lower power limit. Clock speeds were mixed. The 4080 was clocking higher in 2 of the 3 games, but it's close. And these are stock results with no GPU overclocking. Alright, game time. In Cyberpunk 2077, the newer 5070 Ti was performing a little better in terms of average FPS at 1080p, but the dips in performance, as measured by the 1% lows, were 21% faster with the 5070 Ti, though this may be more due to the newer CPU paired with the 5070 Ti. If we enable ray tracing and DLSS upscaling, the 4080 starts reaching higher average frame rates, though the 1% lows are quite similar now. Black Myth Wukong was always faster on the 4080 laptop, reaching a 10% higher average FPS at 1080p and 8% higher at 1440p. FPS actually increases with ray tracing plus upscaling enabled at 1440p and 4K, and the gap between both GPUs is much smaller now. Not to mention the newer 5070 Ti has better 1% lows at 1080p and 1440p, which may be due to its newer CPU and faster RAM, but that's just a real-world difference as newer GPUs are paired with newer CPUs and RAM. Ghost of Tsushima had one of the biggest differences seen out of all 25 games tested, with the 4080 reaching a 10% higher average FPS at 1080p, 16% higher at 1440p, and 15% higher at 4K. Granted, with these sorts of frame rates, you definitely want to turn DLSS on for a better experience. There wasn't much difference in The Last of Us Part 2. Honestly, I doubt you'd be able to tell the difference between them if you did a blind test and played on either laptop. It's a similar deal in Space Marine 2. These differences are so small, you're just not going to notice if you're gaming on the 4080 or 5070 Ti. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was slightly better on the 5070 Ti laptop at 1080p, which I suspect is due to its better processor. Otherwise, the 4080 was only a few frames ahead at 1440p and 4K. But things change with ray tracing and upscaling enabled, where the 5070 Ti was now ahead at all three resolutions, both in terms of average FPS and 1% lows. For some reason, this game just chokes hard on my 4080 at 4K, which is why this is the 5070 Ti's biggest win at this resolution. Red Dead Redemption 2 had the biggest win for the 4080 at all three resolutions, but I'm pretty sure there's a bug with this game that makes it perform crap on RTX 50 GPUs when paired with Intel CPUs, as I've seen it run worse than it should on 5+ laptops now. Regardless, Nvidia's lack of driver optimizations aren't a reason to ignore a popular game, but that's why the 4080 was 27% faster at 1080p and 1440p. Forza Horizon 5, on the other hand, was running better on the 5070 Ti at 1080p and 1440p. Given there's basically no difference at 4K, where we'd be more GPU bound, I'm inclined to think that we're seeing the CPU difference come into play here. Alright, I think you get the idea. Instead of wasting your time individually talking through the rest of the 17 games tested, I'm just going to quickly skip through the rest of the results on screen now, so feel free to pause the video if you want to take a closer look at any specific game. The reason I test so many games is so that we can get a much more accurate average result from a wider selection of titles, which allows us to draw a better conclusion. In other words, more data equals more better. Let's take a look at the average differences next. On average, over all 25 games tested, at 1080p, the older RTX 4080 laptop GPU was less than 5% faster compared to the newer RTX 5070 Ti laptop GPU, with both running at full power. But I'd expect a lower difference at 1080p, both because it's not as GPU heavy as the others, and because the CPU differences would be more likely to make themselves known here. Stepping up to the higher 1440p resolution, and the 4080 was now around 7% faster compared to the 5070 Ti, which isn't really a big difference. The 5070 Ti is kinda just feeling like a 4080 replacement. At 4K, the 4080 had a similar 7% lead over the 5070 Ti, though of course it's held back by that weird Spider-Man 2 outlier. If we choose to ignore that, then the 4080 was 8% faster on average. Here's how things look if we average the FPS from all 25 games together. This makes it really easy to see the differences, or in this case, the lack of difference. Despite the 4080 laptop sucking down more power, it's only really a few FPS better than the 5070 Ti. Kinda makes you wonder how much smaller the gap would be if the 4080 was running at the same 140 watts as the 5070 Ti. Actually, hang on, we have the technology to do that. And yeah, the gap between them closes. The difference between both at 140 watts is going to be smaller, which is to be expected based on our power scaling data from earlier. I guess technically a bigger difference will be if you count multi-frame generation from the RTX 5070 Ti, which is one of Nvidia's biggest selling points for the RTX 50 series this year. But I think they've overhyped it and used it to mislead people. Only the newer RTX 50 series has access to the new multi-frame generation feature, which basically just means it can generate more AI frames than the 4080. Both laptops can use frame gen in the 2x mode, where one frame is generated for each real frame. But with multi-frame gen, the 5070 Ti can also use the 3x mode, where 2 frames are generated per one real frame, or the 4x mode, where 3 frames are generated per one real frame. Look, I think frame generation is a useful feature when used properly, and according to this investigation by Tim from Hardware Unboxed, that's when you're playing single-player games that aren't latency sensitive, with a base frame rate of 70 to 80 FPS prior to generating frames. And most of the games that I personally play fall into that bucket. So when I play games on my computer, I turn frame generation on and I don't even think about it. It just offers a better experience, or at least a smoother experience. But at the end of the day, it's simply not fair to compare AI-generated frames against rasterized frames and pretend that they're the same thing and comparable. Turning on frame generation isn't the same as boosting FPS. The visual quality and latency aren't going to be the same, so it's just not an apples-to-apples comparison, even if frame generation does have its place. No, what I think will make the 5070 Ti more attractive is its price. Hopefully. Prices of both GPUs prices will change over time, so check the links below the videos for updates and to see if there are current sales. Because if we find any gaming laptops with either of these GPUs on a good sale, we'll add them to our gaminglaptop.deals website. We update that every day to include all of the best sales, so make sure that you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop with that link below. Right now, in late July 2025, it's quite difficult to actually buy an RTX 4080 laptop. It seems like Nvidia stopped making the GPUs, so Best Buy doesn't have many options in stock. This MSI Vector with garbage screen has gone on sale for less than $1,500 in the past, and you used to be able to get solid 4080 laptops from $1,800 to $2,000 on sale, but apparently not anymore. Meanwhile, laptops with the 5070 Ti start from $1,750 at Best Buy at the moment, but so far the lowest we've had one on the deals website for was $1,560, almost $200 less. So from a cost per frame perspective, the 4080 wins if both GPUs cost the same, as it performs better, which means to actually get any value from this generation's 5070 Ti, you'd need to find it for less than you could have just got a 4080 laptop for. Otherwise, you could have been getting better performance from the 4080 for the last 2 years if you just bought earlier. But fortunately, many of the 5070 Ti laptops we've had on the deal site so far have been cheaper than their 4080 counterparts from last gen, so there is value to be had here. On the one hand, yeah, that's kind of expected. The 5070 Ti doesn't perform as good as the 4080, so you'd expect 5070 Ti's to be cheaper. But then on the other hand, the 5070 Ti often isn't that much lower in performance compared to the 4080, so it means a similar tier of performance and 12 gigs of VRAM, which is probably going to be the new sweet spot for 1440p gaming, becomes available at a slightly cheaper price. Still not an amazing improvement considering this came out 2 years after this, but I suppose it's better than nothing. So if you're buying now, unless you find a nice 4080 deal, you'll probably be buying a 5070 Ti. And if you've already got a 4080, getting the 5070 Ti and a performance downgrade just to get frame generation isn't really worth it. No, just hold on to the 4080 because it's still going to perform well for a few years yet. But if you are upgrading or looking for better performance, maybe it's worth getting a 5080 or 5090 laptop. Check out this one next where I've compared both GPUs to find out.